The sharp clack of heels pierced the pre-dawn hush of the Regal Horizon Hotel's grand lobby, echoing across its gleaming marble expanse. "Excuse me, sir, you missed a spot." The words, cold and commanding, froze James Carter mid-motion, his mop gripped tight, heart stuttering like a skipped stone. That voice, icy, precise, rich with the unyielding authority of someone who'd never known invisibility, belonged to Eleanor Hayes. At 35, she was the billionaire CEO of Hayes Enterprises, her face splashed across Fortune, Newsweek, and Entrepreneur in a single dazzling month. Now, in the soft glow of downtown Chicago's skyline, she stood watching him scrub a stubborn stain, her silhouette sharp against the dawn. James offered a curt nod, his jaw tight, and returned to his task. She didn't wait for a reply, her black heels retreating with silent power, leaving only the faint trace of her perfume. 6 years of being unseen had hardened him. One more day wouldn't break him, or so he thought. His phone buzzed in his pocket, once, twice, then a third time, insistent as a heartbeat. James's fingers tightened around the mop handle, the hotel's cardinal rule ringing in his mind. No personal calls on duty, but the screen flashed a +131 prefix, Netherlands. His pulse quickened. Glancing around, he saw no supervisors, only a handful of early guests at the lobby's far end, their voices muffled by distance. He slipped behind a towering marble column, its cool surface grounding him as he pressed the phone to his ear. "Dit is James," he whispered, voice barely a breath. A warm, scholarly Dutch voice answered, "Professor Carter, this is Dr. van der Meer from the University of Amsterdam. It's been years, but your abstract on language as a cultural bridge reached us." James straightened, words flowing like a forgotten melody, Dutch spilling effortlessly from lips that hadn't spoken it in a decade. He confirmed the work, field research from a life buried under janitor's blues and unpaid bills. For 2 fleeting minutes, a spark reignited in his chest, a whisper of the man he'd once been. The call ended, but the lobby had fallen eerily still. Guests, bellhops, the concierge, all frozen, their eyes locked on him. And there, mere feet away, stood Eleanor Hayes, her gaze no longer cold, but wide with quiet astonishment, as if she'd glimpsed a ghost. James's throat turned to sand, his pulse a frantic drumbeat. "I'll call back later," he muttered into the deadline, shoving the phone into his pocket as if it burned. Before he could move, a voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Carter, my office. Now." It wasn't Eleanor. It was Mr. Hargrove, head of operations, a man who savored power like fine bourbon. Slow, indulgent, excessive. James followed, steps heavy, past the gleaming check-in counter and down a dim service hallway to a cramped office reeking of stale sweat and microwave curry. The door slammed shut, sealing them in. "Do you think this is a playground, Carter?" Hargrove snapped, his voice dripping with disdain. "No, sir," James replied, tone flat, eyes fixed on the wall. "Do you know how this looks? A janitor chatting in gibberish Dutch in the middle of my lobby?" "It was Dutch, sir," James corrected softly, a flicker of defiance in his chest. Hargrove blinked, momentarily derailed. "I don't care if it was Martian. Miss Hayes saw you breaking protocol, standing there like a lost tourist." James swallowed the retort, clawing at his throat. Pride didn't pay hospital bills. "You're lucky I'm not firing you," Hargrove growled. "Effective immediately, you're reassigned to the loading dock restrooms. Midnight shift." James met his gaze, unyielding, but silent. "Sir, I—" "Dismissed." He walked out, the door's echo a final punctuation to his demotion. That night, the silence in James's cramped apartment was a heavy shroud. In the next room, Sophie slept, curled beneath a blanket adorned with cartoon planets, her favorite. She hadn't spoken since the accident, not a single word in months. Her silence was a wound, her drawings and scribbled notes the only bridge to her heart. James sat at the kitchen table, a cup of instant coffee cooling untouched in his hands. On the wall, a faded frame held relics of a past life, a Princeton diploma, 3 certificates from international linguistic symposia. They mocked him now, like artifacts from a lost world. His phone buzzed again, not Amsterdam this time, but the hotel's front desk. James Carter, he answered, wary. Mr. Carter, you're requested at Human Resources. Immediately. Executive floor. His heart lurched. The executive floor wasn't for cleaning staff, not unless something was catastrophically wrong. 15 minutes later, James stepped into the elevator, his uniform crisp, shoes polished to a mirror shine. In his back pocket, Sophie's hospital invoice crinkled, a talisman in case he needed to beg for more hours. The executive floor gleamed with power, glass walls, filtered air, a silence humming with authority. The HR assistant didn't look up. Mr. Carter, conference room B, Miss Hayes is waiting. His stomach twisted. He knocked once. Enter, came the reply, sharp and clear. He opened the door. Eleanor Hayes stood alone by the window, downtown Chicago's lights glittering behind her, like a fractured constellation. She didn't turn. You speak Dutch? Her voice was measured, probing. Yes, James said, cautious. And Mandarin? French? Italian? Yes. She faced him now, her eyes piercing. You've been mopping floors here for 6 years. He didn't answer. I reviewed your file, she continued, tone clipped. 12 internal applications, all denied. James nodded, old wounds flickering in his chest. Yes, ma'am. I'm offering you a temporary reassignment, Eleanor said, her words a lifeline tossed into dark waters. Linguistic liaison for the Global Commerce Forum. It starts in 72 hours. We're hosting delegations from 6 countries, and 2 lead translators just backed out. I need someone who understands not just words, but tone, context, culture. James's breath caught, his mind reeling. Ma'am, I'm not. You're fluent. You're qualified. You're underutilized. Her arms crossed, her gaze unyielding. I don't tolerate waste. Compensation is $5,000 a week. The room spun. Silence stretched, heavy with possibility. Finally, he asked, Why me? Eleanor's eyes softened, just a fraction. Because I saw you speak as if the world was listening, even when it wasn't. Something inside James cracked open, a door long sealed. He'd been invisible too long. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to be seen. You don't look like a janitor. The words jolted James from his thoughts. Across the desk, Helen Foster, the HR director, studied him with eyes like polished glass, her gray-streaked ponytail catching the light. She leaned forward, her gaze dissecting him as if he'd uttered an impossibility. He shifted in the chair, the weight of her scrutiny pressing against old scars. That's because I used to be something else, he said quietly, his voice steady but laced with the ache of memory. Helen nodded, sliding his worn personnel file back into its folder. 18 years here, and I've seen it all. Fake degrees, exaggerated resumes. But you? Hiding credentials like these? That's new. She tapped the file. Princeton, M.A. in Applied Linguistics, Research Fellow at the University of Florence, Guest Lecturer at the University of Paris. 8 publications, 1 daughter, and yet 6 years mopping floors. James stayed silent, the weight of his past pressing against his ribs. You applied for 12 positions, she said. 17, he corrected, voice soft but firm. 5 got no reply. 12 were denied. Her brow furrowed. On what grounds? Overqualified, not the right cultural fit. One said my accent might distract. Helen's jaw tightened, a spark of indignation in her eyes. Those jobs went to interns, donors' kids, former baristas. James gave a faint shrug, bitterness long dulled. I stopped being surprised years ago. A knock interrupted them. Eleanor Hayes stepped in without waiting, her slate gray pantsuit cutting a sharp silhouette against the soft light. No jewelry, no softness, just an expression that could carve stone. Thank you, Helen, she said briskly. I'd like a moment alone. Helen hesitated, then left, the door clicking shut like a gavel. Eleanor leaned against it, arms folded, her presence filling the room. James stood, but she waved him down. You don't have to, she said, then cut to the chase. I read your abstract, the one Vandermeer referenced. James blinked, caught off guard. You read academic journals? I read everything, she replied, her voice simple but unyielding. especially about people under my roof. She stepped closer, her eyes locking onto his. This assignment isn't charity, Mr. Carter. It's not pity. I don't believe in either. His gaze held hers, searching. Then what is it? She tilted her head, a rare vulnerability flickering in her eyes. It's a correction, a chance to fix what's been broken. The next morning, James stepped into the executive suite, a lanyard heavy with meaning around his neck. The badge read Carter, J. Intel Liaison, its weight both foreign and electric. He touched it once, tentative, as if it might vanish. The suite was another world. Glass walls gleaming, air crisp with purpose, silence humming with unspoken power. An assistant, barely older than Sophie, handed him a laptop, a tablet loaded with schedules, and a folder marked Global Commerce Forum, Key Delegates. By mid-morning, James had spotted 4 critical mistranslations in the summit materials, one turning strategic collaboration into Mandarin for hostile takeover. He didn't boast. He didn't complain. He fixed them, his hands steady but his heart racing with purpose. For the first time in years, he felt the pulse of who he'd been, a man who spoke not just words but worlds. And somewhere deep inside, he wondered if Sophie, with her silent strength, would one day feel this too. The executive suite of the Regal Horizon Hotel was a world apart, its glass walls catching the morning light like prisms of ambition. Minimalist furniture stood in sharp contrast to the weight of the silence, a silence that thrummed with power, unbroken except by the soft hum of filtered air. A young assistant, her eyes darting with nervous efficiency, handed James Carter a sleek laptop, a tablet heavy with schedules, and a folder labeled Global Commerce Forum, Key Delegates. By mid-morning, James had already unearthed 4 critical mistranslations in the summit materials. One so egregious it twisted strategic collaboration into the Mandarin equivalent of hostile takeover. His heart raced, not with panic but with purpose. He didn't boast or complain. He simply fixed them, his hands steady as his mind danced across languages, rekindling a fire he'd thought long extinguished. In the conference preparation room, James was arranging name placards when a voice, smooth yet edged with condescension, broke his focus. "You're not what I expected." He turned to face a man in his early 40s, salt and pepper hair framing a face accustomed to command, his designer shoes gleaming under the fluorescent glow. "Richard Blake, Director of Operations," the man said, extending a hand. James shook it, his grip firm but measured. "You must be the janitor everyone's whispering about," Blake added, his smile sharp, never reaching his eyes. "Just here to help," James replied, his voice calm, betraying none of the defiance flickering in his chest. Blake leaned closer, his tone low and pointed. "This summit is our biggest stage. CEOs, diplomats, foreign ministers. A single word could cost millions. I hope you're not rusty." James held his gaze unflinching. "I'm fluent, not rusty, and if a word costs millions, maybe you should have hired a linguist 6 months ago." Blake's smile vanished, his jaw tightening. James turned back to the placards, the air between them crackling with unspoken tension. That evening, James returned to his modest apartment, the faint scent of lavender and boiled rice greeting him like an old friend. Sophie sat cross-legged on the couch, her small frame bent over a large sheet of paper, her crayons moving with meticulous care. He kissed the top of her head, a ritual that anchored him. "What's tonight's masterpiece?" he asked softly. She held up her drawing, a vibrant array of flags, France, China, Netherlands, Italy, each paired with a phonetic phrase scrawled in crayon. James chuckled, warmth spreading through him. "Spying on my work, huh?" Sophie's shy smile lit her face as she pointed to the Dutch flag and whispered, "Welcome." The word stopped his heart. She hadn't spoken to anyone but him since the accident, her voice locked behind a wall of trauma. "You remembered," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. She nodded. Kneeling beside her, he said, "Tomorrow I'll be in a room full of serious people, talking fast and loud, trying to outshine each other." Sophie raised an eyebrow, amused. He tapped her chin gently. "But I'll be thinking of you, of this moment." She picked up a red marker and wrote Speranza beside the Italian flag. "Hope," James murmured, his throat tight. That's the best language of all. The next morning, Eleanor Hayes stood alone in the main summit hall, her gaze fixed on her team as they scrambled to perfect seating charts and audio setups. James approached, tablet in hand, his new badge a quiet weight against his chest. "Ready for this?" she asked without turning. "I've faced tougher rooms," he replied, a hint of a smile in his voice. "Ever translated 3 trade proposals in 4 languages in under 2 hours?" She shot back. He grinned. "Ever trusted a janitor with your billion-dollar summit?" She finally met his eyes, her expression softening. "I do now." He paused, the weight of her trust settling over him. "You didn't have to pull me out of the basement, Miss Hayes." "No," she said quietly, "but I needed to." "Why?" She hesitated, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Because I've stood in rooms full of brilliant minds who understood nothing of the world. You? You listen like someone who knows what it's like to be unheard." His silence spoke louder than words, a bridge between their worlds. Later in the summit prep room, Eleanor appeared in the doorway, a cup of black coffee in one hand, a folder in the other. Her presence filled the space before her voice did. "Don't correct them, just do it right," she said, stepping closer. James looked up from his laptop, startled. "I've reviewed your notes," she continued. "The Mandarin welcome letter, the Italian etiquette guide, and my favorite, the French delegate seating order. I didn't know the vice minister had a phobia of odd numbers." James leaned back, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "He does. Seat him at table 13 again, and he'll be on a plane to Paris by noon." Eleanor smirked, sipping her coffee. "No pressure then." She handed him the folder, credentials, schedules, private briefings, and a black name tag etched in silver. James Carter, International Liaison. "I thought this was temporary," he said, studying it. "It is," she replied, tapping the tag. "But this makes it real. Optics matter, Mr. Carter, even when truth should be enough." He met her gaze. "You think they'll listen to me?" She tilted her head. "They'll listen to me, and I'm telling them to listen to you." A pause hung between them. "For 6 years I tried not to be noticed," he said softly. "Invisibility has its comforts." Eleanor sat across from him, her eyes searching. "And now?" He closed the folder gently. "Now I remember why I love being heard." By afternoon, James was deep in the summit's machinery, emails flooding in, urgent requests for language clarifications, protocol concerns, cultural nuances. He moved seamlessly from Dutch to Mandarin, Italian to Korean, correcting idioms that could offend, smoothing phrases that might alienate. The work didn't surprise him. The respect did. Assistants sought his input. Directors nodded in passing. Even Grace Thompson, the elderly catering lead who'd served the hotel for 2 decades, slipped him an extra croissant and whispered, "About time someone like you got seen." But not everyone was pleased. Richard Blake lingered at the edges, his eyes narrowed like a strategist watching his board shift. James ignored him until he couldn't. "Carter," Blake called, cornering him near the East Wing elevators. "Funny thing," he said, adjusting his tailored blazer's cuff. "I pulled your background after your promotion. Impressive, sure, but no academic work since 2017. No corporate references, no recent credentials." James kept his tone even. "Is there a question in there?" Blake stepped closer. "You think a week of translations and coffee meetings makes you irreplaceable? This hotel runs on structure, not sentiment." James's smile was faint but sharp. "Maybe it's time the structure stopped mistaking loyalty for silence." Blake's jaw tightened. James stepped into the elevator, letting the doors close on the man's glare. That night, James returned home to Sophie, who sat quietly on the floor, surrounded by flashcards cut from old magazines. Words in her blocky handwriting danced across them. Bonjour, grazie, ni hao, hope. He sat beside her. "How was your day?" She shrugged, then pointed to a card with "Listen" in bold, clipped from a hearing aid ad. "You think I'm good at that?" he asked, smiling. She nodded. He tapped the card. "People think listening is waiting for someone to finish, but real listening, it's standing still in a storm, letting the words hit you without flinching." Sophie tilted her head, then wrote "Feel" beneath it in crayon. James's throat tightened. Yeah, he whispered. Exactly. The next morning, Eleanor summoned him to her office with a direct message. No assistant, no email. Sit, she said, her voice crisp. He did. She handed him a folder. Draft speeches for the executive panel. 2 have translation errors. 1 has a cultural insult we can't afford. Notes on my desk by noon. James flipped through the pages. You don't want me to soften them? No, she said. Sharpen them like a blade. He leaned back. You trust me with your voice. She paused, her gaze steady. I trust your integrity. You understand what's meant when nothing's said. Most people never learn that. He closed the folder, his voice soft. My wife used to say, language isn't just what we say, it's what we dare to say out loud. Eleanor's eyes flickered, a shadow of memory crossing her face. That's beautiful. It was her favorite quote. She was a sign language interpreter. She believed silence had as many dialects as speech. For a moment, something softened in Eleanor's expression. Did she teach you to listen? She asked quietly. James smiled, the ache of loss sharp but warm. No, life did, after I lost her. The room stilled. Then Eleanor slid a thin envelope across her desk. Final confirmation. You're speaking for the hotel at the summit's opening, translating my words live. His eyes widened. That's not what we agreed. No, she said. It's what you've earned. He stared at her, then said, You're not who I expected, Miss Hayes. She tilted her head. And who did you expect? Someone who builds walls. Her gaze held his, unflinching. I do, but I'm learning to leave the door unlocked. The rooftop garden of the Regal Horizon Hotel was a hidden sanctuary, closed to guests, a quiet patch of sky framed by waist-high ivy, weathered benches, and the faint hum of city air vents. Maintenance visited once a month. No one else came. That's why James brought Sophie here every Saturday morning. She loved the silence, the open space, the sun's warmth. She sat cross-legged by a corner planter, her sketchbook open, a red crayon in one hand, a blue in the other, drawing a Dutch flag with careful, perfect stripes. James sat nearby, sipping coffee from a paper cup, his phone open to the summit schedule. Monday loomed, 2 interpretation panels, 5 welcome sessions, 3 cultural briefings, all resting on his shoulders. The pressure was immense, but so was the thrill of feeling alive again. A breeze stirred Sophie's hair, but she didn't look up, lost in her art. Then came the sound of heels. James and Sophie glanced up. Eleanor Hayes stood at the rooftop door, tablet in hand, phone pressed to her ear. Her eyes swept the space, pausing on the girl with the sketchbook. I'll call back, she said, hanging up. She approached slowly. I didn't know this was open to staff, she said. It's not, James replied. That's why it feels like it belongs to people. Eleanor's gaze settled on Sophie. This is my daughter, Sophie. The girl looked up but said nothing, her hands still on the page. Eleanor crouched beside her, careful not to crowd. You like flags? Sophie nodded once. Which one's your favorite? Sophie pointed to an Italian flag she'd drawn earlier. Good choice, Eleanor said. I love their food, their art, their chaotic traffic. James chuckled softly. Eleanor turned to him. She's quiet. She doesn't speak to strangers, he said. It's selective mutism, trauma-triggered. She speaks only when she feels safe. Eleanor nodded, a shadow of understanding in her eyes. I know that feeling more than I'd like. A delicate silence settled, warm and fragile. Then Eleanor leaned closer to Sophie. I was quiet as a kid, too. My father ran a company that had no room for soft voices, so I stayed silent until it hurt. Sophie tilted her head, curious. Eleanor offered a rare small smile. One day I learned silence isn't weakness. It's another kind of language. Sophie blinked, then turned a blank page and began sketching a French flag, 3 vertical stripes in vibrant crayon. Eleanor watched in silence. She's listening, she whispered. James's voice was low. I know. Later that afternoon, James was reviewing signage in the prep room when Eleanor knocked once on the glass door. He looked up, surprised. She stepped in, holding something behind her back. I brought something, she said. He raised a brow. Not another folder, I hope. She revealed a hardcover book, Children's Flags of the World, vividly illustrated. Saw it in a bookstore this morning. Thought of her. James took it gently, as if it were fragile. Thank you. Eleanor hesitated, her voice softening. She reminds me of someone I knew. A girl told she had to be loud to be powerful. That softness was a liability, Eleanor Hayes said, her voice barely above a whisper, a confession wrapped in steel. James Carter met her gaze, his eyes searching the fortress she'd built around herself. And what became of that girl? He asked gently. A sad smile curved her lips, fleeting as a shadow. She built an empire and walled it tight. And he closed the book Sophie had inspired, its weight heavy in his hands. Empires crumble without windows. Eleanor didn't reply, but her gaze held his, unguarded for a moment. Then softer she asked, can people change the language they speak, even if it's silence? James looked toward the window where downtown Chicago sprawled in layers of light and steel, a city pulsing with unspoken stories. Yes, he said, his voice steady, but only if someone hears what they're not saying. That night, Sophie slept clutching the Children's Flags of the World book, its pages a quiet testament to her curiosity. James sat by her bedside, watching her slow, steady breaths, each one a fragile promise of safety. He brushed a lock of hair from her forehead and whispered, "You're not invisible anymore." His phone buzzed, shattering the quiet. A message from Eleanor. "Need you to review delegate seating for Monday. Also, thank you for today. I haven't felt human in a while." His fingers hovered over the screen, heart tight with empathy. "You never stop being human. You just stop being heard." A pause, then her reply. "What if I don't know how to be heard anymore?" He typed without hesitation. "Start by whispering to someone who won't interrupt." The next morning, James crossed the bustling lobby of the Regal Horizon Hotel, his silver badge glinting. Carter, J, Intel Liaison. He passed Richard Blake, briefing 2 interns, their eyes flicking to his badge before dropping away. He didn't care. In 3 days, Eleanor had given him what no one else had dared. Responsibility without chains. But the real shift, the one none of them yet grasped, had begun on that rooftop where Sophie, silenced by trauma, had pointed to an Italian flag and spoken with her eyes. Safe. That was the spark. The rest would ignite. Trouble surfaced later that day, hidden in the Mandarin welcome packet. James spotted it while cross-checking. A single misplaced character, a brushstroke tilted wrong, transforming "we welcome you with honor" into "we accept your inferiority." His breath caught. This wasn't a typo. It was diplomatic dynamite. He scoured the materials, name cards, speaker bios, signage, cultural briefings. The errors weren't random. They formed a pattern of subtle sabotage, tonal missteps in Korean, disrespectful phrasing in Arabic. These languages were old friends to James, and they were being mangled. His jaw tightened as he traced the source through the internal portal. The contract pointed to Prime Lingua Solutions, approved by Richard Blake. Digging deeper, he found the truth. The vendor had charged $40,000, but their lead linguist had no credentials, no record. The signature on the deal? Chloe Blake, Richard's niece. "You're sure?" Eleanor stood behind her desk, morning sun slanting across her slate-gray suit, casting her as a marble statue pulsing with quiet fury. James slid a folder across the table. "I triple-checked. She used machine translations, barely proofread. One Korean phrase turned strategic partnership into economic annexation. This could have sparked a diplomatic walkout." Eleanor scanned the side-by-side translations, her expression unyielding, but her silence heavier, like a storm gathering strength. "Why would Richard approve this?" she asked finally. James didn't flinch. Because it was his niece. Because no one questioned him. Because systems that reward connections over merit breed this. She looked up, her eyes piercing. "You're not angry." "I've been angry," he said softly. "Now I'm awake." She closed the folder with a snap. "What would you do in my place?" He hesitated, then answered, "Replace every word before Monday, and ensure the person responsible never touches another syllable here." She nodded once, decisive. "Then let's get to work." That night, James sat in the print room, surrounded by 3 interns, two trusted translators, and a coffee pot long past its prime. They worked through the night, correcting hundreds of lines, reprinting signage, adjusting fonts for cultural nuance. It wasn't glamorous, but it was vital. Near dawn, Eleanor appeared with a tray of sandwiches. "You look like hell," she said, setting it down. "Feels like I've been translating Dante's Inferno in 6 dialects," he quipped, exhaustion lacing his voice. She sat on the table's edge, unwrapping a sandwich. "Do you always fix what you didn't break?" He looked up, Sophie's face flashing in his mind, her silence born of a world too loud. "My daughter stopped speaking because life drowned her out. So yeah, I fix what I can." Eleanor felt quiet, her gaze distant. "Do you resent carrying more than your share?" He leaned back, honesty cutting through fatigue. "I used to think invisibility was safety, but lately, being seen is harder and better." She nodded slowly. "Visibility's a risk. It's also a mirror." He tilted his head. "What do you see in yours?" She looked away, her voice soft. "Someone still learning not to flinch." By morning, the prep room buzzed with renewed energy. Interns darted with stacks of corrected materials. Staff triple-checked name tags. James drilled translators on pronunciation, his voice steady as he guided them through tonal nuances. Then Richard Blake strode in, his confidence unshaken but his eyes flickering when they met James's. "Carter," he said, his smile thin. "Busy morning?" James didn't respond. Blake glanced at the signage rolling past. "Interesting. I thought Prime Lingua finalized those." "They were redone," James said evenly. "Everyone." Blake's smile faltered. "Without my sign-off?" "Without your errors," Eleanor cut in, stepping from behind, her voice sharp enough to draw blood. She stood beside James. "Richard, Prime Lingua's contract is suspended, effective immediately." "We're auditing everything." Blake blinked, stunned. "That's absurd. You don't have the authority." "I'm the CEO," she said, her tone steel. "I have exactly the authority." Silence fell, heavy and sharp. "Next time you approve a contract," she added, "ensure the qualifications aren't fabricated, and your niece isn't learning Mandarin from TikTok." Blake's face paled. He opened his mouth, but James spoke, calm as stone. "Know what they call a word without meaning, Mr. Blake?" Blake stared. "Noise." That evening, as the sun dipped behind Chicago's skyline, James stood alone in the rooftop garden, the city's pulse humming below. Sophie joined him, clutching a folded paper. She handed it to him. Unfolding it, he saw Mandarin calligraphy. "Courage doesn't shout. Sometimes it just stands." His heart swelled. She smiled, silent but radiant, her presence a quiet defiance. They were standing, together, and tomorrow the world would hear them. The lobby of the Regal Horizon Hotel shimmered with life, flags of 12 nations glowing under amber chandeliers, their colors vibrant against the glass atrium. Security moved with silent precision. Luggage carts glided past marble pillars. Voices wove a tapestry of a dozen languages. James stood at the center, navy blazer pressed, silver badge gleaming, tablet in hand, fighting the weight of it all. The Global Commerce Forum was beginning. Eleanor's voice crackled through his earpiece, calm and controlled. "Netherlands delegation just arrived. Room 708 is ready. You're on." He exhaled. "Copy." Striding toward the main doors, he greeted a group of suited delegates, their polite laughter filling the air. Among them, a tall, balding man with thick glasses scanned the lobby warily. "Professor van der Meer," James said, switching to flawless Dutch. "Welcome to the Regal Horizon. Your room is ready with a quiet space for prayer and a late checkout for Friday." "So," the professor froze, then smiled, delight breaking through. "You're not Dutch," he said in Dutch. James grinned. "No, but I listened hard enough to sound like one." By midday, James had translated in 3 languages, resolved a seating dispute between rival ministers, and ensured the Italian delegation received still water, not sparkling. He didn't pause, didn't falter. He moved, he listened, and the room listened back. A French delegate leaned in, eyes bright. "You don't just speak languages, you speak the silence between them." James smiled. "That's where the truth lives." Later, escorting South Korean tech investors to their dining hall, a man in a gray suit tapped his shoulder. "Aren't you James Carter, the linguist who wrote on adaptive dialects and business diplomacy?" James blinked. "Yes, I wrote it." The man grinned. "I cited that paper twice at Harvard. Brilliant work. I didn't know you consulted here." Before James could respond, the man turned to his colleagues. "This is the guy. The soundless bridge paper." Delegates crowded, asking for photos, quotes, insights. For 6 years, James had been invisible. Now the spotlight didn't burn, it warmed. From the mezzanine balcony, Eleanor watched, her chest lifting with quiet pride. Grace Thompson, the elderly catering lead, stood beside her, balancing a tray of tea. "Not bad for a janitor," she murmured. Eleanor's eyes stayed on James. He was never a janitor. He just wore the wrong name tag. As the day's sessions wound down, champagne corks popped in private lounges and staff exhaled. James stood alone in the prep room, pouring tea into a paper cup when Eleanor entered. "You impressed them," she said, her voice soft but sure. He turned. "Not hard. They expected a nobody. I was just better than invisible." She approached, arms crossed. "They asked if you'd join the Paris conference next quarter." He blinked. "Wait, what?" She held up her phone. 3 offers. 2 from NGOs, 1 from a corporate embassy group. They want your contact." He stared at his cup, heart racing. "And you said?" "I said you're too valuable to lose," she replied, pausing, "but not too selfish to keep." He looked down. "I don't want to chase rooms anymore. I want to build one." She tilted her head. "For who?" "For people like me, ones no one hears until they're forced to listen." Eleanor studied him, her gaze steady. "Know why I chose you to translate for me?" "The accent," he quipped. Her smile flickered, then turned serious. "Because I've spent my life silencing rooms. I wanted to know what it felt like to speak through someone who listens." James Carter paused, the weight of Eleanor Hayes's question hanging in the air. Then with quiet resolve, he said, "Then let's do it right." She tilted her head, curiosity flickering in her eyes. "What do you mean?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small folded paper. Sophie's Mandarin calligraphy, its delicate strokes spelling out, "Courage doesn't shout. Sometimes it just stands." "Let's not just fix this summit," he said, his voice steady but burning with purpose. "Let's fix the blueprint. Let's find everyone like me, still hidden in the basement." Eleanor stared at the paper, then at him, her gaze piercing yet softened by possibility. "You really think we can?" He shrugged, a spark of defiance in his eyes. "Someone has to try." She reached out, her fingers brushing the paper as she took it, her voice a whisper. "Then we begin tonight." That night, James stood in Sophie's doorway, watching her sleep, the children's flags of the World Book clutched in her small arms. Her breathing was slow, steady, a fragile anchor in a world that had once drowned her voice. 6 years. 6 years of locked doors and unseen potential. Today he had been the key. His phone buzzed, shattering the quiet. A message from Eleanor. "Tomorrow I want to talk about something bigger. You ready to be heard?" Permanently. His heart tightened as he typed, "Only if we ensure others are heard too." A pause, then her reply. "That's the only way I know how to win." The next day, in the break room's muted hum, James turned to Olivia Grant, the sharp-eyed HR analyst. "Olivia, how many people like me have we missed?" he asked, his brow furrowed over a file. She shook her head. "Not janitors who speak 6 languages. Qualified, brilliant people who never made it past the first screening, who didn't have a Blake in their corner." He leaned back, the weight of her words sinking in. "I don't know. A few dozen?" Olivia opened her laptop, spinning it toward him. "Try 147 in the last 3 years. His breath caught as he stared at the spreadsheet. Positions, applicants, resume scores, internal notes. The patterns were stark. Names tagged with accented English, overqualified, cultural mismatch. Non-white applicants rejected at triple the rate of their less qualified white peers. Internal applications from cleaning staff, kitchen workers, maintenance crews. Flagged, then buried. "This is deliberate," James whispered, his voice tight with restrained fury. Olivia nodded grimly. Someone didn't want people rising unless they came through the right doors, bloodlines, or skin tone? His fist clenched. How long have you known? 3 weeks after I started, she said quietly. I flagged it to Blake. He called it filtering for cohesion. James's eyes flashed. Cohesion isn't a filter. It's a leash. Olivia didn't smile. I was going to quit until I saw your name on that summit badge. Silence settled, heavy with shared purpose. We need to show this to Eleanor, James said. All of it. He didn't request a meeting. He strode into Eleanor's office, folder in hand, fire in his chest. She looked up, startled. James! He dropped the folder on her desk. Read it. She opened it, her face shifting as she scanned the pages. Shock at 3 minutes, silence at 5, a whispered realization by the end. This isn't bias. It's a system. James's voice was low, unyielding. A system that rewards mediocrity with connections and punishes excellence that doesn't look the part. Her knuckles whitened around the pages, her voice taut. This is damning. No, he corrected. It's truth. And truth isn't damning. It's liberating when you stop running from it. She met his gaze, searching. Why now? Why bring this to me today? He held her eyes. Because you're the only one who won't flinch. That night, Eleanor called an emergency meeting with the audit team, her presence commanding the room like a storm held at bay. She sat at the table's head, eyes steely as directors filed in. Richard Blake entered last, his gaze flicking to the files, then to Eleanor. What is this? He asked, voice cautious. A reckoning, she replied, her tone cutting through the air. Days later, an independent investigation launched. Emails unearthed, interviews conducted. Eleanor made one thing clear. No one is safe from the truth, not even me. The hotel buzzed with whispers, some fearful, others hopeful. James moved through the halls, no longer waiting to be seen, but seeing for others. In the housekeeping corridor, Isabella Morales, a cleaner from El Salvador, stopped him, her hands trembling as she handed him a crumpled envelope. My daughter, she said, eyes glassy, top of her class in finance. Applied here 3 times. No call back. James took the envelope gently. Can you make it different? She asked. He placed a hand on her shoulder. I can't change everything, he said softly, but enough to matter. Later in the rooftop garden, Eleanor found him staring over Chicago's twilight skyline. They're fighting it, she said quietly. They say I'm tearing the company apart. James didn't turn. You're not tearing it down. You're opening the windows. She sat beside him, her voice a whisper. I built this place for years, and now I see the cracks I ignored. He met her eyes. Maybe the cracks aren't the problem. They're where the light gets in. Her breath caught. You believe that? He nodded. People can change if they're brave enough to face who they've been. She fell silent, then murmured, What's next? He looked to the horizon, the city aglow in lavender and gold. We keep going. We dig deeper. We bring every buried name into the light. The next morning, Eleanor stood before the board, unflinching. Slides, data, testimonies. She held nothing back. This isn't a PR issue, she declared. It's a moral one. A director scoffed. Are we prioritizing feelings over operations? Her glare silenced him. No, we're prioritizing justice. Operations built on injustice collapse, publicly. The room stilled, not with fear but with conviction, a shift as tangible as the dawn. That night, James returned home to find Sophie coloring at the table. She held up her drawing, the Regal Horizon Hotel, its doors flung wide, people of all faces and flags streaming in, smiling. His voice cracked as he knelt beside her. Is this what it looks like now? She nodded, then whispered, You opened it, Daddy. He pulled her into his arms, tears falling, not from grief, but from the radiant truth. He was no longer invisible, and neither was she. In a quiet corner of the hotel, a new sign replaced the old, authorized personnel only, by the staff elevator. It read simply, If you've got something to say, we're ready to hear it. For the first time in the Regal Horizon's history, they meant it. The Open Speak Hub was born, No suits, no titles, no keycards. Anyone could enter. And they did. Malik Johnson, a line cook with 12 years in the kitchen, shared 32 ideas for service improvements. Lillian Chen, a housekeeper with a master's in environmental engineering, unveiled a plan to cut water usage by 40%, gathering dust for 6 years. Lucia Morales, Isabella's daughter, presented a financial model that left the audit team speechless, her borrowed blazer trembling with her courage. James stood among them, not above, listening. One afternoon, Eleanor lingered outside the hub, hesitant. James caught her eye. "You built a room without locks," she said softly. He smiled. "You gave me the blueprint." She crossed her arms, studying the space. "What happens when it gets messy?" "Messy is where truth lives," he replied. "Silence breeds mold." She stepped inside and sat, joining the circle. Every Wednesday, they held open-floor sessions. No hierarchy, just ideas and confessions. One day, Sophie joined, sketching quietly in the corner. As a debate over staff representation grew heated, she stood, unnoticed at first. Then she walked to the whiteboard, picked up a red marker, and wrote "Feel." The room fell silent. Her small voice, clear and soft, broke the hush. "Everyone here knows how to work, but who feels what someone carries in silence every day?" James's heart stopped. Executives, workers, all froze. A girl's silence for nearly a year had become the building's voice, and they listened. Later, under the rooftop garden's starlit sky, James and Eleanor sat in silence, Chicago's 1,000 glowing windows pulsing below. "She spoke," Eleanor said quietly. James nodded. "She did, and asked a question I can't answer." Eleanor glanced at him. "That's what makes it powerful." She looked at her hands. "I thought running a company was about control, tight systems, predictable outcomes." He waited. "But now," she sighed, "it's about spaces where the unexpected can thrive." He smiled. "Like Sophie." She met his eyes. "Like you." A week later, Eleanor faced the press, James at her side to announce the Unheard Talents program, a platform to unearth overlooked brilliance across all levels, paired with mentorship and direct access to executives. "We're not waiting for greatness to knock on the right door," she declared. "We're opening every door ourselves." As cameras dimmed and reporters left, she turned to James. "You didn't say a word." He smiled. "I didn't need to. You said what mattered." Her real smile broke through. "You trust me now?" He nodded. "More importantly, you trust yourself." For the first time, Eleanor, who'd silenced boardrooms, looked vulnerable. "I don't know who I'm becoming," she admitted. James stepped closer, his voice warm. "Maybe the most powerful thing you'll become is someone who lets others become too." That night, Sophie waited at the kitchen table, 2 mugs of cocoa steaming before her. She pushed one to James. "Do people need a title to matter?" she asked, her voice small but steady. He took the mug, heart full. "No, sometimes they just need someone to remind them they never did." She smiled, writing enough on her notepad. "What's that for?" he asked. "How I feel tonight," she said. He swallowed hard, nodding. Downstairs, the new sign by the staff elevator stood firm. "If you've got something to say, we're ready to hear it." The summit's final day gleamed with polished silver trays and hidden lies. Outside the ballroom, cameras prepped for closing remarks. Dignitaries, CEOs, press from 3 continents. Eleanor's speech loomed. James and Olivia Grant pored over the final translation slides, triple-checking every line in Mandarin, Dutch, and Korean, their focus a quiet rebellion against the chaos they'd overcome. Everything was set, or so James Carter thought, until the screen flared to life, casting a harsh glow over the conference room. He froze, eyes narrowing at the Mandarin keynote's 3rd line. "We claim mutual expansion." The words were wrong, a betrayal of his careful phrasing. He checked the backup file, the saved PDF, the live sync, all overwritten. Olivia Grant leaned in, her voice low with alarm. "James, this isn't your work." "No," he said, his tone tight, edged with steel. "It's sabotage." His gaze snapped to the tech booth, where Richard Blake stood beside a young woman, her nervous eyes fixed on a flash drive clutched in her hand. James strode over, his steps deliberate. "Take it down," he said, voice low but sharp as a blade. Now, Blake turned slowly, a smirk playing on his lips. Mr. Carter, I assumed you'd be rehearsing your little speech. I'm not speaking, James shot back. And this version, your niece's, was pulled for a reason. Blake shrugged, unruffled. Your edits weren't finalized. I restored the contracted version. James's voice dropped, cold and unyielding. The version that insulted 2 delegations. Blake's smirk widened. They'll survive, or they won't. Money smooths the offense. James stepped closer, his words a razor. You don't fix the world by laundering harm in better font. Eleanor Hayes entered, her presence a quiet storm. Her eyes flicked to the screen, then to James's taut face, before settling on Blake. What did you do? She demanded. Blake's calm shattered. I protected this summit's integrity. He overwrote 6 figures worth of vetted translations with academic fluff. James opened his mouth, but Eleanor raised a hand. Richard, she said, her voice ice cold, did you authorize this change without approval from the translation lead or me? He bristled. I acted within operational precedent. Her gaze turned lethal. You acted like a man who can't stand being outshone by someone outside your world. Blake glared, his face flushing. This is a mistake, Eleanor. He's not one of us. No, she said, he's better. His voice rose. You're ruining this company over a janitor with a language app and a sob story. Eleanor didn't flinch. Get out. This is your last day. HR's been notified. Security will escort you out after the summit. You're done. Blake laughed, bitter and hollow. You won't last a month without me. James stepped forward, calm as stone. I lasted 6 years without you. I'll be fine. As security led Blake away, Eleanor turned to the young woman beside him. Chloe Blake, her shoulders rigid with fear. What's your name? Eleanor asked, her tone softening. Chloe Blake, she mumbled. You weren't ready for this job, were you? Chloe shook her head. But your uncle said you were? Another shake. Eleanor nodded. It's not your fault, but what you do next is. Chloe's voice trembled. I didn't want to lie. I just didn't know how to say no to him. Eleanor's eyes held hers, steady but kind. Then let this be your first no. Start over. Learn the language properly. Intern if you must. Earn your second chance. Tears welled in Chloe's eyes. Thank you. Eleanor gestured to Olivia. She'll guide you, but if I see another shortcut, you're out. Chloe nodded. I promise. Just before noon, James stood in the wings of the main ballroom, the weight of the moment pressing against his chest. He wasn't scheduled to speak, but Eleanor turned to him, microphone in hand. Want to say something? He hesitated, glancing at his plain blazer. I'm not dressed for speeches. She smiled, a rare warmth in her eyes. The truth doesn't need a tux. He nodded and stepped to the podium, the room falling silent. No notes, no script, just the weight of 6 years and 1,000 unspoken words. 6 years ago, he began, his voice steady but resonant. I cleaned these floors. I emptied your trash. I was told I was invisible, too qualified, too quiet. I believed it until someone asked me to translate not just words but the truths left unsaid. He scanned the room, faces from a dozen nations watching. This summit isn't just about business. It's about recognition, about seeing those who've been mistaken for weak because they're silent. He paused, Sophie's face flashing in his mind. There are people in this building, maybe beside you, who speak 5 languages, who outshine your finance directors, who carry solutions in their pockets while wiping tables. You haven't seen them because you weren't looking. A stir rippled through the crowd. His voice softened, a quiet fire. But this week showed me something. Talent doesn't need a name tag you recognize. It's waiting to be heard. He stepped back. The applause began slowly, then swelled. Not polite, but raw, real. The kitchen staff rose first, then the janitors, the interns, the rest. Their claps a chorus of awakening. That night in the rooftop garden, Eleanor handed James a glass of wine, the city's lights shimmering below. He raised an eyebrow. Celebrating? Commemorating, she said, her voice soft. The day the old rules broke. He smiled. And the new ones began. They clinked glasses, sitting in silence as Chicago breathed beneath them. Sometimes the unsaid spoke loudest. The echo of that applause lingered, in hallways, break rooms, and hearts long relegated to shadows. James's speech had ignited something no memo or bonus could, the feeling of being seen. The next morning, Walter Harris, a Vietnam vet with 2 hearing aids, stood in a staff huddle. "I used to fix pipes," he said, voice rough but sure. "Now I wonder if I can fix broken people too." His words spread like wildfire, a spark of change. The following week, James, now Director of Internal Communication and Cultural Strategy, sat with Eleanor in the executive lounge, planning the Unheard Talents program's rollout across all Hayes Enterprises properties. He still wore his old janitor's watch, a reminder of where he'd begun. "I expected more resistance," Eleanor said, scanning reports. "You might still get it," James replied, "but when people crave change, they don't ask who's cooking. They ask who's opening the door." She looked at him, then said something new. "Come to my place for dinner." He blinked. "You cook?" She smirked. "No, but I order beautifully." Her penthouse was too quiet, humming with success but aching with solitude. Sophie wandered its vast rooms, pausing at the grand piano, then the color-coded bookshelf. "Where's the mess?" she asked Eleanor, her voice soft but curious. Eleanor smiled, caught off guard. "I don't have one." Sophie nodded. "That's okay. We brought ours." James laughed from the kitchen, fumbling with takeout containers. Over dinner, Eleanor poured tea into delicate porcelain cups, her voice low. "I've built systems to keep things sharp, predictable, to avoid being touched." James stayed silent, but Sophie reached across, placing her small hand over Eleanor's. Eleanor didn't pull away. On the balcony later, Chicago sparkled like an apology for its coldness. "Why did you pull me from that lobby?" James asked. Eleanor took a breath. "I saw a man who didn't need to shout to be heard." He studied her. "And why let me stay?" She turned, wind catching her hair. "Because I don't want to run this alone, and because Sophie showed me what grace is." His heart tightened. She asked if she'd ever stand on a stage. "And I told her stages are just elevated floors." Days later, the hotel hosted its first Unheard Talent showcase. Lucia Morales presented a budgeting model for food waste. Malik Johnson proposed a mentorship menu for chefs and interns. Lillian Chen unveiled her water-saving plan. The applause began in the kitchen, the crew stepping out to lead the ovation. Eleanor's eyes glistened. "This sound, it's bigger than the summit." James nodded. "It's not approval, it's belonging." That evening, Eleanor opened a letter from her late sister, Clara Hayes, its handwriting achingly familiar. She read aloud, voice trembling, as James stood nearby. "Eleanor, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I never blamed your distance. You were surviving, but power is lonely. Love isn't. Hold on to those who make you softer, not weaker." Her hands shook. James touched her arm gently. She already knew. Eleanor wiped a tear. "She saw me when I couldn't see myself." In the days that followed, Eleanor offered James and Sophie a spot in the Hayes residential program. He declined, asking instead for a classroom. "For who?" she asked. "For those told learning ends when survival begins." She smiled. "Done." A week later, in a quiet corner of the Regal Horizon, a learning center opened. James sat on the floor, teaching housekeepers, bellhops, and a security guard cross-cultural communication. Sophie stood at the whiteboard, writing, "Welcome." "This," James said, "is what it means to be seen, not sorted." Eleanor, watching from the doorway, realized she hadn't just hired a translator. She'd found someone who translated people back to themselves. Above the Regal Horizon, the sky glowed a post-storm blue, quiet, certain, impossibly clear. James Carter stood in the newly converted Learning Center, a space once cluttered with mop buckets now alive with possibility. Shelves brimmed with books in 6 languages, their spines a vibrant mosaic of knowledge. A corkboard bloomed with staff accomplishments, scribbled goals, notes of encouragement in bold block letters, and flowing cursive, a testament to dreams no longer buried. Sophie sat cross-legged on the floor, guiding Lucas Rivera, a bellhop, as he traced his name in Korean, her small hands steady with purpose. Eleanor Hayes stood near the door, arms folded, her gaze soft as if witnessing a seed she'd planted burst into bloom. "I don't recall this in the Hayes Enterprises blueprint," she said, her voice tinged with wonder. James looked up from his laptop, a smile tugging at his lips. "That's because it wasn't in the plans. It grew from the cracks." She stepped inside, her movements deliberate, as if afraid to disturb something sacred. "I used to think success was penthouses, numbers, legacy," she said. James tilted his head gently. "And now?" Her eyes rested on Sophie, who was laughing, a bright, rare sound, as Lucas accidentally spelled his name backward. "Now," Eleanor said, "it's this, laughter in a room that once echoed with silence." James rose, crossing to her. "You made this possible." She shook her head, her voice soft but firm. "No, I opened a door. You walked through and held it wide for everyone else." Later that afternoon, Eleanor invited him for a walk. No meeting, no agenda, just a quiet stroll through the Regal Horizon Hotel's bustling lobby. Guests moved seamlessly alongside bellhops and porters, no longer invisible. They passed the unheard talents wall, its portraits celebrating staff lifted from obscurity. On the rooftop garden, Sophie folded a paper crane with gentle precision, her focus a quiet defiance of her past silence. James watched her, then turned to Eleanor. "She still doesn't talk much in crowds." Eleanor's smile was warm. "She doesn't need to. People feel her." He met her gaze, voice low. "So do I." A breeze stirred, carrying the city's pulse. Eleanor reached into her coat pocket and handed James a small box. "What's this?" he asked, opening it. Inside lay a silver pen, engraved with ERC, his late wife's initials. His breath caught. "This was hers." Eleanor nodded. "Found in storage, from a box HR never returned after the accident. I had it restored. For your first day." He swallowed hard. "First day of what?" She stepped closer, her voice low, resolute. "Global Director of Cultural Strategy, reporting to me. I want you to build this, not just here, but everywhere Hayes Enterprises reaches." James fell silent, the weight of her offer pressing against his heart. "I already have everything I need," he said finally. She nodded, unsurprised. "I had to ask." His eyes softened. "I'll say yes, but only if we build it together." She didn't speak, but her hand found his, a quiet bond forged without contracts or power plays, just two souls who'd reshaped each other. That evening, the rooftop buzzed with life. Staff from every department gathered, sharing food, music, stories. Emma Wilson, once a janitor, spoke of her acceptance to a local college. Lucia Morales, Isabella's daughter, beamed about her corporate internship. Lucas Rivera proudly greeted guests in 4 new languages. In the midst, Sophie stood beside a small whiteboard, not on a stage but among her people. With a marker she wrote, "No one is perfect, but some stay." The words hung in the air, a quiet call to healing. Silence fell, then a single clap broke it, followed by another, until the rooftop swelled with applause, a wave of hope. Eleanor reached for James's hand again, not to claim but to connect. "You said you didn't know how to be touched," he said softly. "I didn't," she whispered, until someone listened so deeply it felt like being held. The sun sank, painting the skyline in lavender and gold. No one rushed to leave. Endings like this were beginnings that chose to linger. Later, James sat with Sophie on the garden's edge, her head resting on his shoulder. "Are you happy, Daddy?" she asked, her voice a fragile gift. He looked to the stars flickering into place. "Yes," he said, "not because everything's fixed, but because I'm no longer invisible." She smiled. "Me neither." Her words struck deep. Sometimes those who speak least teach the most, and those overlooked show us how to see. This story, if it stirred your heart even a little, deserves to be shared. Where are you reading from today? Tell us in the comments. Your voice matters more than you know. If tales like this ignite hope, heal wounds, or remind you to believe, hit subscribe and ring the notification bell to catch the next one. We're crafting a space where stories are strength, kindness is power, and healing is a choice to stay. Thank you for being here, for listening, for believing in the magic of stories. Until next time, stay kind, stay human, stay hopeful.